14th chapter of St. John's Gospel in various languages, and now we hear a reflection and the teaching of today's theme by the Holy Father.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buongiorno.
Dear brothers and sisters, good morning.
Siamo al centro della settimana santa.
We are in the middle of Holy Week.
Siamo al centro della settimana santa.
We are in the middle of Holy Week, which lasts from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday.
Entrambe queste domeniche si caratterizzano.
Both these Sundays are characterized by the feast that takes place around Jesus, but they are two different feasts.
Domenica scorsa abbiamo visto Cristo.
Last Sunday, we saw Christ solemnly entering Jerusalem,
come una festa.
welcomed as the Messiah, and it was like a feast.
Vengono stessi sulla strada mantelli,
Cloaks and branches cut down from trees were laid before him on the ground. The exultant crowd loudly blesses the King who comes and acclaims, "Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Those people celebrated because they see Jesus' entry as the arrival of a new king who would bring peace and glory. That was the peace that those people were waiting for, a glorious peace, the fruit of royal intervention, that of a powerful Messiah who would have liberated Jerusalem from the Roman occupation. Others probably were dreaming of the re-establishment of a social peace and saw Jesus as the ideal king who would feed the crowd with bread, as he had already done, and would work great miracles, thus bringing more justice into the world. But Jesus never speaks of this. He has a different Pasch ahead of him. It is not a triumphal Pasch. The only thing that he is concerned about in the preparation of his entry into Jerusalem is to ride a colt tied on which no one has ever yet sat. This is how Christ brings peace into the world, through meekness and mildness, symbolized by the tethered colt, symbolized by a tethered colt on which no one has ever sat. No one, because God's way of doing things is different to that of the world. Indeed, just before the Passover, Jesus explains to the disciples, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you." These are two different ways. The way that the world gives us the peace and the way that God gives us peace, and they're the two different ways. The peace that Jesus gives to us at Easter is not the peace that follows the strategies of the world, which believes it can obtain it through force, by conquest, and with various forms of imposition. This peace in reality is only an interval between wars. And we know that this is interval, we know it very well, this peace. The peace of the Lord follows the way of meekness and the cross. It is taking responsibility for others. Indeed, Christ took on himself our evil, our sin and death. In this way he freed us. His peace is not the fruit of some compromise, but rather is born of self-giving. This meek and courageous peace, though, is difficult to accept. In fact, the crowd who exalted Jesus is exactly the same, who a few days later will shout, "Crucify him," and fearful and disappointed will not lift a finger for him. In this regard, a great story by Dostoevsky, the so-called legend of the Grand Inquisitor, is always relevant. It tells of Jesus who, after several centuries, returns to earth. After a few years, he comes back onto earth. He is welcomed immediately by the rejoicing crowd, who recognizes and acclaims him. Come with us. But then he is arrested by the Inquisitor, who represents worldly logic. The latter interrogates him and criticizes him fiercely. The final reason for the rebuke is that Christ, although he never wanted to become Caesar, the greatest king of the world, preferring to leave humanity free rather than subjugate it and solve its problems by force. He could have established peace in the world, bending the free but precarious heart of man by force of a higher power. But he didn't want to. He respected our freedom. This is what the Inquisitor says to Jesus. Had you taken the world in Caesar's purple, you would have founded the universal state and given universal peace. And with a lashing sentence he concludes, for if anyone has deserved our fires, it is you. This is the deception that is repeated throughout history, the temptation of a false peace based on power, which then leads to hatred and betrayal of God. In the end, the Inquisitor longed for Jesus to say something, however bitter and terrible. But Christ reacts with a gentle and concrete gesture. He suddenly approached the old man in silence and softly kissed him on his bloodless, aged lips. Jesus' peace does not overpower others. It is not an armed peace. It is never an armed peace. The weapons of the gospel are prayer, tenderness, forgiveness, and freely given love for one's neighbor, to any neighbor. This is how God's peace is brought into the world. This is why the armed aggression of these days, like every war, represents an outrage against God, a blasphemous betrayal of the Lord of the Passover, a preference for the face of the false God of this world over his meek one. War is always a human action which brings the idolatry of power. Before his final Passover, Jesus says to his disciples, "Let your hearts not be troubled, neither let them be afraid." Yes, because while worldly power leaves only destruction and death in its wake, his peace builds up history, starting from the heart of every person who welcomes us. Easter is therefore the true feast of God and humanity, because the peace that Christ gained on the cross in giving himself is distributed to us. Therefore, the risen Christ on Easter Day appears to the disciples and repeats, "Peace be with you." And this is the sign that Christ has won over death. He has risen. Brothers and sisters, Easter means passage. This year above all, it is a blessed occasion to pass from the worldly God to the Christian God, from the greed that we carry within us to the charity that sets us free, from the expectation of a peace brought by force to the commitment to bear a real witness to the peace of Jesus. My brothers and sisters, let us place ourselves before the crucified one, the wellspring of our peace, and let us ask him for peace of heart and peace in the world.